If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Hello, friend. My guest today is a wonderful colleague of mine, Amy DeGrossa. She is an educator and transpersonal life coach, a certified clinical hypnotherapist, a Reiki master, an associate professor of Spanish, and the mother of 4 amazing adult children. She specializes in guiding women through transitional phases in life, like empty nesting, career changes, identity shifts, and spiritual awakening. And she supports them in navigating these phases with grace, clarity, and heart-centered wisdom. Today, we're going to discuss what it takes to stay boundaried in transition. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Mariya.
I'm curious on your thoughts about the role that boundaries play in navigating life's transitions.
That's a beautiful question. You know, when we're navigating transitions, there are so many things that come up. I think that in order to gain some clarity about where we're headed and what we're experiencing, I know for myself, it really requires me to spend some time contemplating and bringing myself into the present moment so that I don't feel so scattered, right? So I would say by really honing in where we are in a given moment and allowing ourselves to feel into the experience that we're having gives us some pretty reliable information as we learn to trust that, as we learn to trust the feedback that we get from our bodies. And so when it comes to stepping into relationship with others, which is where I feel boundaries most often surface, right? When we are faced with situations that may feel perhaps a little bit out of our comfort zone, or they don't feel aligned with our energy, or they feel, in some cases, downright triggering. And it could happen with people you know, people you don't know, people you're very intimate and close with, your spouse, your parents, your kids. And in my experience, the best thing that I have found that works is to really just become very present with what am I believing about myself in this particular moment? Am I getting feedback from another person? Is somebody leaning in on me in a way that feels uncomfortable? And being able to identify that and trust that and stay true to that and don't dismiss it. Because I think what I have learned over the years is, somebody will say something or do something, and if it's affecting my ability to respond in an authentic way, then it's an opportunity for me to check myself. Okay, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right.
Mm.
And, just kind of stop, pause, and before reacting, teaching myself to respond. And it's been a big mindset shift for me over the years.
I like breaking out the word responsibility as in responsibility.
Yeah.
It's our ability to respond, and it's ours. No one can ability for us.
Yeah.
And it helps sort of clarify what's mine and what's yours, right?
100%. One of the relationships that I'm thinking of where this is really pertinent in my personal life is with my children, and they have been some of my greatest teachers with boundaries. They're grown and they all have beautiful lives of their own. And along the path, in the process of them growing up, one of the things that I've found out is that by listening to them and respecting and honoring who they're becoming in a way that allows them to speak for themselves and not me speak for them. Like, for instance, they'll share a major win. And as a mom, you're really proud, right? And you want to go share their news with everybody. Well, sometimes that actually can be hurtful to them because maybe it's their news and they want to share it. So I learned that that was kind of crossing a boundary. on my
Hmm.
side by sharing their news. They were very good at guiding me with all of that. Hey, mom, please give me an opportunity to share this. This is my news. And it's really become a respectful thing between us.
I imagine that it's a really interesting, challenging, beautiful process to go through as a parent, and especially a mother, because at one point there was an experience of more oneness in the beginning, and then eventually you're closer to two. But, when the infant is so dependent on you, it still feels like an extension of you.
Mhm.
And eventually, as they start becoming their own human, like at one point in time, it made perfect sense. Like their news was your news, but then eventually it became their own. There's like that gradual process of individuation that I imagine would be just interesting to navigate as the parent. I guess I'm just trying to offer a little bit of compassion for you and other parents learning
Oof, yeah.
like when to do that, or even messing up by, overstepping that for a while and being like, oh, that's right, you're not an extension of me anymore. Of course I will honor this boundary, but like it also
Yes.
makes sense that you would miss that, as that transition unfolds.
I will tell you, Mariah, I think it's also generational because the generation before us, our parents, I come from a generation in which you honor your parents by doing as they say, and you don't contest anything they say, and you don't counterindicate what their wishes are. There's sort of like this, okay, whatever you say. But what I learned about that in my own experience with my own mom, for example, was that I didn't get to speak my truth. And there were things I just didn't share with her as a result of that. And that made me very sad until I learned about boundaries, as a matter of fact, and about codependency and how I was contributing to the problem by not being honest with myself and not sharing with her how I honestly felt.
It's challenging. I do feel like we live in a culture that has normalized enmeshed codependence
Mhm.
over generations. And so I also have a lot of compassion for those of us living today who are, sort of breaking out of this generational trauma and learning how to navigate a healthier interdependence
Mhm.
without swinging the pendulum from, dysfunctional codependence all the way over to like unhealthy hyper independence, and so finding that interdependence where we're all sovereign individuals, but we're also collaborating synergistically by, sharing things with each other and opening up and owning our truth and respecting other people's truth. And like it's tricky. It's a lot easier with the black and white extremes, but the
Yeah.
middle way is more challenging and also more rewarding.
I agree with you. And I think it perhaps is most challenging in intimate relationships, because I'm thinking in workplace situations, there are things where it's very easy to set your boundaries. No, I'm sorry, I'm not available for that, right? Um, but when you have a vested interest in a relationship, one of the fears behind not speaking your truth, at least for me, is feeling rejected or being disrespected, right? Or not being seen or heard or valued in what I have to say. And so there's some work to be done, I think, around how we view ourselves and the relationship that we have with ourselves comes very much into play here. It is taking personal accountability and responsibility for ourselves to speak up from a place of honesty and a place of kindness. Because I think there's a lot of ways to react. Um, and I think I have been spending the last 10 years or so learning how to respond instead of
Mm-hmm.
react. I'm still honing it. It isn't just a magic switch that you turn off. I've been married for almost nearly 40 years. So there are things in my relationship with my spouse where they have tended to be habitual things that trigger. And I've had to learn to observe, to give myself the grace of just understanding, okay, this is just information about who he's being. And I don't have to take this personally, right? And this really requires stilling oneself and being present to what's unfolding. Because I think if we do engage in the trigger, then we're both in the mud wrestling. And neither one of us is being clear or maybe sometimes not even kind to one another, you know?
Those old triggers are hard, and developing a practice of self-awareness is really essential so that we can recognize when we're triggered, when we have the impulse to react in a pre-programmed way. And so we can have the choice to respond in a way that's more aligned with our values and goals rather than that old programming.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, it sounds like something so simple to say. I will tell you, it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy to do because you really have to pay attention to who you're being.
I like a distinction in terms. I usually talk about self-awareness in probably a broader context, but someone told me that they prefer to separate self-knowledge from self-awareness, and self-knowledge is knowing about yourself and your triggers and all of that, and self-awareness is the ability to have that awareness in the present moment. Seeing it as like the starting phase is just building self-knowledge, and then acknowledging that there's sort of a separate skill set where you're building that ability to observe, like to be the witness of yourself in the moment, that's what starts to give you that control over whether you react versus respond.
You know, where I practice that often is in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been a tool that in my experience, I'm very grateful to have learned how to meditate and to practice it regularly because it is a place where I can really get quiet. And it doesn't mean that I don't have any thoughts. What I mean by that is that I just become an observer of my own thought process and my own experience, all of it. Um, and it's almost like putting myself in timeout, if you will, kind of. But it allows me to connect to a greater part of myself, which for me is a spiritual aspect that is essential. It's a key ingredient, I believe, to knowing myself on a different level, not just on the physical, but on a different multidimensional level, which I think we all are. And so, yes, I think that, you know, it's an important distinction to make self-knowledge and self-awareness. I think for me, I haven't heard it described that way, but that makes sense. For me, self-awareness also really allows us to understand that we have choice, that we always have a choice. And in that, to me, that's a very exciting place to live from because it's full of potentiality, it's full of possibility, it's full of creation. And I think we are creative beings. And, you know, it allows us to expand and to grow and to become all of the fullness of who we're intended to be here in this experience.
Beautiful. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And I also would add that in addition to meditation that helps us strengthen our self-observation skills, which furthers our self-knowledge and builds our self-awareness, developing an embodiment practice has also been really essential for me. The way that my journey unfolded, it was sort of like the last piece. I started with the mental conceptual knowledge building, studying all the wise sages of the world and learning about my mind and how it works and even spiritual aspects. And then working to put them into practice through journaling, affirmations, and eventually even meditation was all really helpful. And it took me far, but only so far. And it wasn't really until I unlocked the embodiment aspect that really started helping me open my life up to bigger, more powerful, impactful changes. And I think that it's really important when it comes to navigating our own life's transitions and boundaries because, something you said earlier was like, this feels off. It's hard to recognize that when you don't know how to feel things in your body.
Right.
And I think for some people, it comes a little bit more natural or easy, but I think for most people in today's culture, we're pretty disconnected from
Yeah.
our bodies. And for people who are living there, at least when I was there, I didn't even really know what that meant. I'm like, what do you mean? Here's my body. I don't know. But I would notice in certain group activities I would participate in that were sort of like shared meditative experiences called circling, people would talk about what was happening for them And for me, it was always like the stories that were coming up in my mind. I was at least aware of those, but other people sometimes would say things like, oh, I'm feeling some like heaviness or tightness in my stomach. And I was just like, what? I couldn't even access. I was like, I don't know, how are they doing that? And eventually, through working with various masters of energetics and whatnot, I finally learned how to get into my body. And now my favorite meditation is sort of a combined embodied self-awareness practice. I like to just work through all of my chakras and just like bring my awareness to each of those, maybe say a couple affirmations, feel into those energetic centers and work my way up. And my mind, of course, will wander on the journey. And then I have to wait, where was I? And go back to it and work my way through. I think I'll also just add for any beginner meditators that something that was really helpful for me was understanding that the goal isn't to have a cleared mind. The goal is to practice clearing it. The goal is about understanding that the mind is always like, just like the heart beats, the mind thinks. It's just thought is just mental output of this organ between our ears. And the goal is just, it's building reps. It's every time you notice a thought, noticing that it's just a thought instead of getting consumed by it. And doing that over and over again, that is the practice. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, I can do that. I used to think I was so bad at meditating, and so I didn't like it because I couldn't just clear my mind. And then once I realized that it's not what it's about, it helped a lot.
Yeah, it's really good to clarify that. And that's true for beginning meditators. And I remember this feeling the same way. Oh, I'm not doing this right. And yeah, I have come a long, long way. And what I notice now in the practice of the meditation, it's not so much the thinking mind, it's really connecting to the observant side of myself, the part of me that is observing the thoughts.
Yep.
And that is a very peaceful place. But you're right, it doesn't mean it's devoid of thinking. It's
Right.
not about that. It really is just finding a restful, peaceful place to really connect to that higher consciousness that we all have access to.
I love actually the analogy without diverging too much on meditation, but I think it's a really powerful tool for all of this. Michael A. Singer in the book, The Untethered Soul, I loved his analogy about like watching TV. And when you get really consumed by the story, it's like you're in it and you forget even like the room that you're in.
Yes.
And if you think about, life's dramas as this like story that's playing out in front of us, whereas you have an opportunity to sort of sit back in that observer's seat and metaphorically speaking, like remember that you're sitting on a couch in a room in a house, that's not that actual story. You're just kind of witnessing it. And of course, the truth is not the couch and the house. It's the spiritual aspect that we're in this body, in this human experience, but our truth is, this infinitely divine spirit having a human experience for a time.
Yes, I completely agree.
And I think it's also helpful from that lens as well to, some people might not resonate with this and that's okay, but I sometimes think of Mariya as my like pet human. And it allows me to just have so much more compassion for her. And just when I see the silly things that she does and the games her ego plays, it's just like, oh, that's just the human experience.
Well, and that's an important observation to be able to observe yourself with compassion, and that is, I think, one of the gifts of stilling ourselves.
Yeah.
However, we're able to accomplish that. I think in the last, I don't know how long, just in the last years, it feels like there's a lot more influence from the Eastern practices of meditation and yoga that have really opened our Western way of thinking and individuating to maybe a more collective way of being, meaning understanding more about who we all are as a collective rather than who we are as an individual.
I absolutely believe that we would be well served to shift, especially in the West. We have such that like rugged individualism.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear more and more voices talking about how limiting our go-to solutions are, even around psychology, where it's just like, what what was your individual formative experience? What are you just experiencing in your own being without, there's not a lot of consideration of that sort of interdependence of like, and if there is, it's often just kind of on a one-on-one level, instead of like the larger community that you're a part of and being influenced by and influencing, and like whether or not you have a larger community and how that alone could be impacting your well-being. And with that self-compassion too, that I mentioned, thinking of myself as like a pet, sometimes that also helps with like reparenting things and noticing that like, oh, well, my human, of course, isn't going to be able to do this very well. Like, what can I do to support her? How can I set her up for more success? And that has actually helped me tap more into the strength or the will to honor my boundaries, because as like a recovering people pleaser growing up, and the formative dynamics that lead to that, viewing other people's needs as my own, like me needing other people to feel safe so I can feel safe,
Mhm.
um as an outmoded coping mechanism, and realizing that I have my own needs that are separate and that I need to care for them, and that I will be okay if they're upset.
Yeah.
um and just like rerouting my safety and security within myself was a really important step for sort of becoming my own steward and caregiver and showing up for myself and consistently doing that. And part of that is stopping abandoning myself and honoring my boundaries consistently. And that helps me build self-trust. And then it's hard and scary and you're shaky at first, but the more you do it, you like every time you honor a boundary of your own, you lay a brick in that foundation so that it feels less scary to do it in the future, because now through all of those experiences that you've got you, even if other people go away, which they usually don't as often as we fear they will.
Yes. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think it's it, having that awareness of oneself, and I can relate to the people pleasing, a lifetime of that actually. Um, where we make other people's needs and experiences more important than our own, and feeling like we need to match them. I remember as a kid always having this experience. I had a mom who suffered from depression, and I always remember feeling like I had to hold back with my joy and my wins because she wasn't in a place to receive it, or I didn't understand that I it just didn't feel fair. She was suffering and I felt like, oh, well, I must have to be the same. I must have to match that affect somehow, right? And it wasn't until many years later, until I started doing my own healing work, where I remember having this huge aha moment where one of my spiritual teachers said to me, but Amy, that both can happen simultaneously. Like grief and joy can happen simultaneously. And it like blew my mind. It like opened this whole experience within me. I was like, I'd never considered that before. I thought that I was, because I was this huge people pleaser in a way, like, oh, I have to be, that I have to be a certain way. I believed that. And then come to find out, oh no, you mean I can be joyful even if somebody else is sad. It just shifted my whole perception of how I relate to others. And so I think doing one's own healing work is really a catalyst for showing up in relationships in, well, first of all, fully, more authentically, more trusting yourself. And it allows you to set boundaries because you know yourself better. You're not just at the mercy of what other people need or think or want or believe, that you should be. What I've also noticed is that as you set boundaries with people, especially people that you're close to, and if they don't like it, sometimes those people slide out of your life and you never see them again. I had that happen with one of my best friends, and it was around this topic of codependency. And I was growing and learning about it. And it just dawned on me one day. I'm like, wow, we're in a codependent relationship. And I wanted to explore that and maybe talk about boundaries. And my friend just was in a different place at that time. And I remember having this huge aha moment because she wrote me this long letter about how I wasn't a good friend and how I'd changed and I wasn't who she thought I was. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm changing and I am not okay with who I've been. And I need to honor that within myself now. And I can't be what you need me to be anymore. I have to be me. And so with great love and deep respect, I just said, I can't be that for you anymore.
Good for you.
So yeah. And it
Oh,
was
it's really hard.
a real learning for sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I had to do something similar in a romantic partnership. And there was a point uh, near the end. It was a very progressive transition, like stepwise. Um, and near the very end, when I told him that it couldn't go on anymore, we fought a little bit, and then I caught myself defending myself. And I was like, you know what? It's okay if you need me to be the demon, like whatever you need to, because I do actually care about you. And that did soften him. But it's hard when people don't grow with you, and being rooted in yourself enough to trust that you're going to be okay. Parting ways
Mhm.
definitely does require some of that inner work and that internally rooted security. And I think a lot of people today, in various ways to varying degrees, there's often a kernel of something around self-worth that's, that's lacking and that's kind of holding us back from these types of things. And um, as I mentioned previously, I feel like we just have to, like, brick by brick build up the self-trust that we've got ourselves, that, we've got our own backs, and that we're not going to continue abandoning ourselves, and recognizing that all of the self-abandonment that we've done in an effort to prevent other people from abandoning us has just been what has kept that wound open, and that it ends up with us being in relationships where we're not actually feeling loved and accepted and seen and appreciated, because we're not actually being ourselves. We're contorting for acceptance. And the only way that we're going to find that love and belonging that everyone's heart desires is by being our authentic selves, being true to what we really need. And the scariest part about that is it does mean you will lose people, because no one is for everyone.
Right.
And I think a lot of people pleasers unconsciously are chameleoning to try and please as many people as they can. And by please, I mean like win their acceptance and approval.
Right.
But then you don't really connect truly with anyone. But once you really do become your authentic self, you're only going to really connect with the people who resonate with that. And that means you're not going to connect well with a bunch of other people who are not aligned for you.
Mhm.
And for me, at least, one of the like biggest things I had to kind of overcome was accepting that I had to learn to accept the rejection of the misaligned so that I could actually connect with the aligned.
Yes.
And shifting out of that survival mode habit of needing everyone's approval was a bit of a process.
Right, because you're sourcing your sense of your identity from outside instead of from the inside. I went through that process as well. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm okay if everybody else around me is okay. Well, that's no way to live, because you completely abandon yourself in the
Right.
process of doing that, and you don't value yourself. So you're right about the self-worth piece for
Yeah.
sure.
I do also just want to add a little caveat. I think that there is an unintended consequence that often happens when the collective we, when we talk about low self-worth being a problem, and that, this concept that we need to learn to love ourselves better, because when you're in that place, the message that comes through is often just you're doing it wrong, you're not loving yourself right or enough, and then it just kind of can compound the shame. And I guess I just want to add that, like, the coping mechanism of self-abandonment on like a dysfunctional level is an attempt at self-care. And I
Mhm.
just want to acknowledge that and just say to anyone listening that, like, people pleasing, it's not because you don't love yourself enough. It's just that you're disconnected from a healthy way to love yourself. It's that your subconscious is trying to take care of you, but it's doing it in a dysfunctional way. So um
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's true. And I also think that we operate from old belief systems. You mentioned earlier
Yes.
about, connecting with the inner child, I think is really important, because that inner child believed a whole set of things about herself growing up that may no longer serve
Exactly.
At the time we were brilliant because we were in surrounded by circumstances that we didn't know how to navigate. And
Yeah.
so it's adjusting, right?
Yep.
To a new mindset, really,
Yep.
and changing the neural pathways and being
Yes.
committed to be responsible for one's own healing and one's own growth. And what I have found is that in doing so, it takes me out of being a victim. It takes me out of blaming other people, and I can see things from multiple perspectives, and I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely. There was a powerful moment in my life. It was just a moment, but it was a huge shift for me and it unlocked something for me. I realized, like, in kind of reflecting on it, that I had been operating on this, not just other people need to be okay so I can feel okay, but like they were the authority
Mm.
on what's okay. And my well-being became threatened to a potentially dangerous level.
Mhm.
And I don't have children, but I parent myself, and it like activated my like maternal instinct. And like my inner mama bear came out and was like, no, you get to be safe here. And I drew like a big boundary in that moment and I left the situation. And having that experience, I've never had it quite that strong before, but it was never such a powerful need for it before either. But like there's a, I don't know, energetic memory of that I carry with me and that is much more easy to access now, that like I have to protect my inner child. I have to protect my needs and my well-being, because especially in codependent relationships, like when you are able to step away just enough to get the perspective to see that like you can either both drown or
Mm.
you can at least save yourself. You can't save them. You guys are drowning in 3 feet of water. You just need to put your feet under you. And if you can do that, you can't help them do that. They need to do it too. And either they will or they won't, but there's no point in both of you drowning. And if we're going to show up to the other relationships that matter, to the causes that we can actually impact and benefit, and to whatever gifts that we might have for the world, we have to stay well and resourced and vibrant enough to show up for all of that. And so like learning to say no has been about protecting my ability to love other people. Like I've learned to love myself in service of my love for other people.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And I think the other piece in this is that this is generational. We're changing things for generations to come, because as we change and grow, so do our offspring, so do the people around us. It has like this ripple effect.
Mhm.
I have found that I'm not around a lot of people anymore who demand of me to be who I'm not. They're just not in my sphere anymore. They have just sort of receded from my awareness, and I'm not expending all this energy trying to make other people feel through me feel better about themselves or me the same
Mhm.
way. Uh, so I think energetically, it's perhaps one of the greatest gifts that we can give to one another, in addition to ourselves. It's
Absolutely.
that we do for us, but also for others.
Talking about us healing generational trauma in this generation, I will say the one coming up behind us is really inspiring. It's so cool the way that they get to sort of like leapfrog or like sort of stand on our shoulders, or like there's a lot that we have been doing that gets to be their starting point. And so they're so far ahead of the game in so many ways. And it's really inspiring and encouraging for the future of humanity, I think.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think that's very true. And we all stand upon the shoulders of others, don't we, as we grow? And if we choose to continue to evolve in consciousness, I think that is in service to humanity.
Absolutely. And speaking of life's transitions, which is your area of expertise, I think regarding boundaries, I think it's helpful to view them as our resource limits and to acknowledge that they fluctuate from day to day, hour to hour, season to season, even like annual seasons, but even life seasons.
Mhm.
And going through transition uses up a lot of mental, emotional, spiritual energy. And so you probably are going to have less resources available for, other people and things. And you might have to draw boundaries a little bit differently than you did in the past. And that's going to be an adjustment for you, and it's going to be an adjustment for the people in your life. How do you feel like that has come into play that you've observed?
Mhm. I think whenever we're in a growth phase of life and a transition, and transitions have many flavors. It could be separating from a spouse, it could be divorcing, it could be losing a parent, it could be moving, it could be losing a job, it could be a lot of different ways where transition happens. One of the big ones in my life has been empty nesting, for example. I have 4 children, and it was sort of a protracted, if you will, I want to say a grieving process, because grief is just not linear, right? It comes and goes and has its touchstones embedded within it and a lot of emotion. And there's 10 years between my oldest and my youngest. And so for over 10 years, I had kids leaving and growing and doing what their sovereign souls are inviting them to do, which is, living their lives. And in the meantime, my whole identity is shifting and changing, and who I see myself and the purpose that I'm here for has evolved tremendously in that process. And so transitions are catalysts for really inviting and understanding that change is for us. It's not happening to us. It is an invitation to understand, okay, what can I learn from this experience so that I can move forward and not sit with regret or sadness or get stuck in grief all the time or think that, oh, woe is me, this is happening to me. And I know that for empty nesters, there's lots of different experiences. Some parents that I've met are so happy that their kids are leaving. They're like, yay, finally, I have some, I can get on with my life. I've met people like that. That wasn't my experience. My experience was um, maybe because I'm tended to be a little bit more codependent, it was harder for me to let go of my kids. But I think it was just the process of coming from a culture, because I grew up in Spain, coming from a culture where your family is the unit from which you operate in life. And the connections that you have with your kids is not something that just disappears once they become 18 and they go off to college, right? We have a lot of focus in our culture here, I believe in the US, to independent, for independence and autonomy. And I think that's great. I'm not knocking that at all. And I think there's a balance between both. I think that there's a lot to learn from collective culture and individual cultures, right? So trying to find and align to what's a healthy place to interact from. I teach at a university as well, and I teach about culture and a lot of different things on different levels. But from cultural perspectives, it's always interesting to me to learn about how people live in other societies. For instance, in Asian cultures and in Latin cultures, the family unit is really important. And separating from family units is not seen as sort of this liberating factor that we tend to give it here in our American culture. So I think coming to terms with all of that, and as I have grown and witnessed my kids leaving and my whole process of navigating through the grief and the joy, because my God, there's so much to celebrate in it as well, right? They're achieving things and they're discovering new experiences and opportunities and trying jobs and relationships. And so watching all of these transformations unfold in front of me and really be able to have the tools to remain grounded in who I am and not need to adapt to be something for each of them
Hmm.
necessarily, but to really essentially show up as my authentic self serves everybody in a collective way. So it kind of comes back to self-awareness, self-responsibility, self-worth, self-compassion, right?
Hmm.
It's a full circle experience, and self-love, of course, in service of the greater love for all.
Beautiful. Would you say then that maybe the role of boundaries in transition is more about learning how to honor the sort of consistency of them despite things changing and being different around you?
You know, one thing that we all know for sure is that change is going to happen. I mean, we can always
Yeah.
count on that. Things
Yep.
don't stay the same. And actually, it's a good thing because, that's how we learn to thrive. It's how we grow. It's how we evolve. And so I think being consistent in terms of staying true to yourself, yes,
Yeah. Hmm.
absolutely. I think
Yeah.
so. And that requires contemplation, I think, and, self accountability,
Hmm.
checking in with yourself. How do I feel? How do I feel about, this experience? And how does someone else's choice affect me? And is it something that I can align with? Or is it something where I need to make a different choice and speak up about it? Um,
I
yeah.
think that one of the trickiest things about boundaries is that because they can be so nuanced and context based, in so many cases, we discover our boundaries because they got crossed. It's like, oh, that was a boundary. And
Yeah.
so I think that, especially because one of the few constants in life is change, um, having a framework for being able to develop that awareness so that you can discover your boundaries as life's situations change,
Mhm.
and knowing how to navigate them when they're crossed, knowing how to, acknowledge them and honor them moving forward now that you've gained the awareness about them. Um, I think it's safe to say my Gates method is helpful for that. The process of grounding and assessing, trusting the other and their journey, and learning sort of good communication skills, and just having that ongoing stewardship of your boundaries and your needs and your limits and your authenticity.
Yes, I think it's really important to stay true to yourself. And I think having tools at our disposal is always helpful.
Well, thank you very much for this conversation, Amy. It has been very delightful.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, Mariah.
Thanks. That was lovely. I thoroughly enjoy every discussion I have with Amy. You can learn more about her at pathways-to-purpose-coaching.com, and you can check out her own podcast, Into the Heart, Finding Wisdom Within. All in all, we covered a lot today, and I just want to reiterate that while gathering insights and information can feel really inspiring, it's not going to help you create lasting change until you integrate it and start incorporating it into your life. So don't stay stuck in your people-pleasing patterns if that's you. Reach out for support so you can finally stop abandoning yourself. Start learning how to connect to yourself and your values and goals and limits, and how to communicate about them in healthy ways that actually nourish your relationships. And even though, yes, some of them may fall away, you will be left with the ones that support you the most. So I know that you are already trying to carry the world on your shoulders. It's perfectly okay to reach out for some support. It's very human. And that's what people like me and Amy are here for. So please do yourself a favor, check out her website, or go to explorelovingboundaries.com to grab a spot on my calendar. No charge, no strings. I'll just hold loving space to really listen to you and hear your challenges, what you're growing through, and we'll set you up with a personalized roadmap for moving forward, whether it's some free resources, some DIY options, or one of my own programs. And don't put this off for some other day. I know it might seem like they're a ways off at this point, but Thanksgiving is coming in a few months. And if that's something that often has you overextending yourself or abandoning yourself around family and pressures, in order to develop better boundaries by Thanksgiving, you'll want to start building your foundation now. So while this is fresh, go set up that call. You'll have much better holiday season. Wherever you're at on your journey, I send you love and courage. Namaste.